So I'm going to say a few things about a funding model that I've been developing with the coalition, and I think it could take us some way to resolving some of the issues that the media currently face, because I think the media are in crisis. It's a bit of a cliche for academics to say this. Of course the media are in crisis, but I think it's actually pretty serious. There's something of a perfect storm going on at the moment. There's a number of factors underpinning this. One, since the mid-1980s, has been deregulation. Problems that there's no cross-media ownership laws, there's no foreign ownership laws. We've got a government that's imposed austerity on public broadcaster budgets, that doesn't really believe in public service charters. There's financialisation. We've got foreign financial investors controlling our media. They're only really interested in share price and revenues. They're not really interested in the civic role of the media. We have convergence, all the different media competing across platforms, chasing the same eyeballs, the same revenue, trying to eat each other's lunches. We've got failing business models. The newspapers in particular have been hit hard. I mean, the hard copy sales have collapsed over the last decade. I mean, we've got even their online advertising has been eaten up by Google and Facebook. And as a result, we're seeing this drive towards consolidation and mergers. Consolidation of newsrooms with cuts in the news budget, journalistic redundancies, casualisation of journalistic work, and indeed, as we're seeing in the case of Fairfax and NZME, big corporations trying to create a virtual monopoly in our newspaper sector. So the upshot of this is that we're seeing increased market failure. And what I mean by that is there's greater reliance of journalists on newsroom subsidies. There's fewer people at the front line doing the journalistic work. There's a greater focus on populist stories, clickbait, less funding for investigative journalism. We've seen examples where, Mark Jennings is here, where the tragedy over losing Campbell Live because of commercial pressures. So we're in an environment where I think there's a real need to recognise that just because we've got ultra-fast broadband and Netflix doesn't mean that public service is any less valuable in the digital era. In fact, I would say it's actually more important. Okay, you can get all the movies you want on demand. You can also get all kinds of news from social media. You can get blogs. But I don't think this is compensation for the core functions of professional journalism. So what am I proposing? Well, it's what I call a marginal levy. And it basically is a 1% or maybe 0.5% levy on a full range of media services right across the spectrum. And in that I mean subscription TV, including Sky and Netflix, I'm including telecommunications, phone, internet bills, mobile bills, audiovisual retail, so actually buying televisions, computers, phones, the actual hardware, advertising, although that can be complicated. And I think a levy like this would actually raise an awful lot of money. I mean, if you look at the turnover in these sectors, in subscription TV, and this doesn't include Netflix, nearly $1 billion a year, telecommunications over $5 billion, audiovisual retail over $7 billion, advertising about $2.5 billion, and probably 250 million of other kinds of media activities. You put a 1% levy on that, you've raised $160 million, or even 0.5%, you've got $80 million. That's a game-changing amount. Well, what might this do? Well, a couple of things it might do. We can have a big discussion about this. You could unfreeze Radio New Zealand's budget and you could re-implement a commercial-free broadcaster platform such as TVNZ7 that could also act as a public service publisher. So it could take all the sorts of content that New Zealand Air would like to put on air, but won't because the commercial broadcasters say no, because it won't rate. And you could also create a substantial pool for a contestable, platform-neutral, public interest journalism fund, so that anyone that wanted to do investigative public interest journalism could apply for the fund and get resource to do the kinds of news that are currently disappearing down the plug hole. Well, they'll never accept this, of course. I mean, the government doesn't want it, the industry will say no, you'll say. But this kind of fund will be fiscally neutral. It's not coming out of the consolidated pot. It's not competing with HIP operations. It's hypothecated. It's ring-fenced from the normal budget. It's also index-linked. And in fact, if one media sector grows and another media sector declines, it balances out because it goes across the value chain. Industry, in fact, wouldn't be badly affected. They just pass that 1% charge onto their consumer. So, for example, if you had a $100 phone and internet bill, it'd be $101. You buy a $1,000 television, you pay $1,010. Pay a $20 phone top-up card, 20 cents goes into the pot. So I don't think we're going to get riots on the streets. And okay, with advertising, there may be some industries that are badly affected. You might have to make exceptions. But surely you can't argue against the principle that Google and Netflix should actually be putting back some funding into our media ecology, because currently they simply collect the rent and they provide nothing. So the levy model, I think, has been adopted in other countries. Spain, France, Turkey all have variants on this. And we've got the Telecom Development Levy, we've got the BSA levy. So this isn't some wild idea that's never been done before. It's actually a very standard approach to funding public interest media in other countries. And I think we could do it here, and it will make a huge difference. Thank you very much. So the question was, how did the levy system work in France and Spain and Turkey? I think Turkey is the old one. It's called the bandrol tax, and it's just a routine levy imposed on audiovisual retail goods. Greece actually had one, but it went on the electric bill. Again, it was just institutionalised. People accepted it. It was at a level that didn't really cause any great concern. France and Spain, their media ecologies are rather more complicated. So I don't know if those models are regarded as a success or not. They're highly politicized. In the case of France, Sarkozy actually started to implement this, but it was partly a response to his withdrawal of public funding from France Télévisions, and they also removed France Télévisions' advertising to boost the advertising available to the commercial sector. So these ecologies are very different from New Zealand, but that's not to say that we couldn't devise a model that would work here. And my simple answer is, if you could put $80 million of public funding into the media ecology to fund public interest media, that's got to have a positive effect. It would make a big difference. So would it affect the profitability of the telco sector? Well,
the media, including the telco sector, but the media sector
as a whole, I don't think the telco sector would be badly affected. I mean, if your internet phone bill was $100 and it came in next month at $101, would you go to another provider?
So yeah, there's a lot of people in New Zealand, a distressingly large number of people in New Zealand, that do not have access to the internet because they cannot afford it.
Well, they won't be paying any levy then, won't they?
No, well, that's really quite unfair.
It's proportional to public expenditure. So if you spend $1,000 a month on media, you'll pay more. The one area that's really complicated is advertising, because you can't pass that on directly to the consumer. But the rate at which we're passing this on to the consumer is so small that I really don't think there's a very good argument. Or if,
As an investor, I can tell you 1% is a very large number when it comes to...
But you're passing, you're not actually paying it, you're passing it on to the consumer in the vast majority of cases.
And they respond by buying less.
Well, possibly, but I think that kind of marginal concern is far less than, for example, worrying about fluctuations in the exchange rate, or for that matter, changes in taxation. I mean, the companies face this all the time, so the idea that this is some terrible imposition on industry, I'm sorry, I don't think that flies at all. I think
just so you know, I'm a director of telco.
Okay.
I guess I'm the third generation person involved in advertising. My dad was the Advertising Standards Authority guy. My granddad was the leader of an advertising agency. They'll ring pretty consistently on this. That it is a tax on an industry that sometimes, especially the media industry, is barely profitable, and you take away a little bit more of that profit.
The telco industries are barely profitable.
Not that
I think I'll just rest my case there.
If you're going to create an $80 million fund for public broadcasters, you're going to give them a whole lot more resource, which is wonderful. We're basically propping up public broadcasters. Is it going to be at the expense of the commercial sector? In terms of our media...
It depends how you set it up. I mean, one suggestion there would be you could actually increase the pot for New Zealand on air, and part of the argument is to create contestable funding. So actually there would be a pot that would grow so that local commercial media can get that back. as long as they're devoting it to public interest types of content.
So they can access some of it.
So they'd be so that's the whole point. And particularly in the case of NZME and Fairfax, if there was a big journalism pot, I think they'd be first in the queue for that. They've already been talking about going to New Zealand Air, saying, "Hey, you fund television, why don't you fund us?" So I don't think there'd be a great deal of resistance there. There may be from the telcos, as Lance has pointed out, but I think if you look at the figures, it's not an unaffordable option.